As Michael pointed out, my name is Dustin Pendell. I'm fairly new to K-State, although I did go to school here way back in the day, so it's not completely new. We are going to do a joint talk like the previous one, and we're going to talk about opportunities, potential opportunities to save on cost of production. We'll start off with the livestock, and then we'll switch gears here in maybe 10 or 12 minutes, and Mike will talk about the crop side. Probably don't need to spend a lot of time on this to try to motivate this talk. About 2 weeks ago, the USDA Office of Chief Economist released their 10-year projections for the different commodities. I pulled out the beef specific, and I highlighted just your fed cattle and your feeder cattle prices. And if you start on your left here under the recent, you just kind of work your way to the right or fast forward across time. What do we see here more recently versus 2026? Not good is what I read the lips. The point I was trying to make here is, at least over the next 10 years, which a lot of things can change, I realize that, but they're not necessarily projecting prices to go up, to be higher than maybe what they are today. We're not going to get back into those 2014, early 2015 prices. Okay, so that's kind of the take-home message from this particular slide. Livestock Marketing Information Center out of Denver. They post kind of what they estimate cow-calf annual returns are. These are your returns over your cash costs, your variable costs. 2014 prices, returns, 15. We see what's happening in 16. What I wanted to point out here is that 2017, that one on the very far right. Again, it's not projecting in the short term to turn around. Okay. So now what we did is we dug into the KFMA, Kansas Farm Management Association's database, which Alan and Michael talked about previously. Specifically, we're looking at the beef, cow, calf enterprise returns above variable costs. And we took those variable costs, so we took those returns and we broke them up by profit categories. We broke those operations up into thirds. So we took the profit, we ranked them 1 to 74, 72, and we broke them up into thirds. And we categorized those as your top third in terms of profit, your middle third, and your lower third. And so then we got some characteristics of those operations. We've got the price and the weight, gross income, and then we got all our expenses. And the question here on the slide, it says, what are the categories that separate the top third, this column right here, versus the bottom third, far right column? Well, is it your price? See if the price they received between those two. That's probably not it. Weight, about a 40-pound difference, but that's again, probably not driving a lot of this profitability. 37, almost 38% of this difference in gross income between your top third and your bottom third, or sorry, between your top third profit and your bottom third profit per cow is because of your gross income. So roughly, 38% of that gross income is, the difference in the gross income is because of income. So where's the other 62%? Well, it's coming from the cost side. And so that's what we're going to focus on the next 3 to 4 slides, is the cost aspects. So I pulled, you're looking at a chart here of that bottom portion of that table, the costs. This is for all 72 of those operations, kind of the average. But two things I really wanted to point out was this purple area, which is the feed costs, which is approximately 50%, 48%. So 48% of those total costs, of those variable costs, are feed. And then the second thing I want to point out is that little red, 21%. That's your pasture. So between your feed and your pasture expenses, it's about 70%, 68% of your total variable costs. Now, if we compare that top third group of producers to that bottom third in terms of profit, we looked at the differences. And this, it's about 60%, 55%, that purple area is due to the feed. So $133 per head difference between your top third and your bottom third producers is the result of feed. So what we want to do is we want to spend the next few minutes kind of honing in on that purple piece there. Earlier this year, a couple animal scientists at Iowa State released a short 2-3 page paper that talks about ways to reduce feed costs. And a couple things that popped out that to me that we're going to focus on is this extended grazing season. How we extend that grazing season as an opportunity to reduce those feed costs and minimize waste costs. We'll talk about hay. But there are a number of other suggestions here as well. Crop residue, first one. Talking about running your cows, suckers, maybe in some corn stalks. There are some advantages, some disadvantages. Some of your advantages, feed savings, as we just pointed out. Potentially could reduce some wear and tear if you put them here as opposed to maybe dry lot. Additional income. If by that we were thinking, if maybe you don't have any crop ground, this is an opportunity to maybe develop a strategic relationship with a crop producer, where you could the crop producer could get some additional income. You could have access to some corn residue or crop residue. There are some disadvantages. Some people argue that you remove nutrients, organic matter, but again, that's going to be a function of how long you probably leave those cows on the stocks. Will require fencing if it does not have it. Possibly you might have to bring water as well. Lack of shelter, and then soil compaction. The soil compaction, you see this show up in the literature a lot. Although there was a recent study, 2015, that was done by Nebraska, Lincoln, that looked at this. They had a long-term study where I think it was 16 years, where they ran cows on crop residue, and then they followed up with corn and beans. And what they found over that 15 or 16-year study was there was no difference between yields where they ran livestock on the crop residue versus when they did not. So some of the studies suggest it, some don't. It's probably going to be a function of some other things as well. What's the soil? How long you leave those cows on that ground? How much rain, etc. Here's just some cost figures we were able to come across when renting out or leasing some of the crop residue. Here in Kansas, in the River Valley, Post Rock districts, crop residue range from anywhere from $3 to $25 an acre. Cover crops, we're going to talk about that next, but since it's here, we'll just mention it. $10 to $15 an acre is another what we found in the state of Kansas. Nebraska's got a survey they did in 2015, $10 to $15 an acre for crop residue. Iowa State earlier this year put out what they're forecasting for their cash rental rates, and they were looking anywhere from $8 to $19 an acre for the crop residue. Cover crops, which we just mentioned, is another possibility to kind of extend that grazing season. We are hearing of more and more producers that are doing this, planting cereal rye, radishes into some crops such as corn. Some advantages: it might improve soil and water quality. Helps with erosion control. It is like crop residue. It is a feed source, so it could potentially help reduce, minimize some of those feed costs. Disadvantages, as we saw before, if you don't have fence, water, that is another cost. Could increase your cost of, then you have to possibly purchase seed, plant, those cover crops, etc. If you've never done it before, you're going to have to learn a new crop. So some management, maybe possibly additional labor as well. And you might, depends on what the yields are for the cover crops, it might not make it, might not pay for it. We do on agmanager.info, we do have a decision tool for cover crops. Michael, Robin, and is it Doug and Jamie Lynn are all part of that down here in the Southeast. And so there is a cover crop budget tool on our website. Actually, it's right here, I guess. In the interest of time, we're not going to spend a lot of time going through it. If you have questions, we can come back. But it is on Ag Manager's website, and you can see they've got various yields in your different categories. Winter wheat is maybe another option to extend that grazing season. We've heard people talk a lot about the dual purpose wheat, or you put your calves on maybe October, November, you run them through late January, early February, then you pull them off and you're still able to harvest a crop later. What we're hearing a lot more people talk about is a graze out, where they'll just put them on in October, November, and you run them through May, early June. So again, as Alan mentioned earlier, talking about the wheat prices and looking forward to next year, we're starting to hear more of discussion on maybe grazing out the wheat as opposed to the dual purpose. There are some decision tools for this as well, if you're interested in knowing more. OSU, Oklahoma State University, obviously they do a lot of this kind of grazing. They've got some nice electronic decision tools. We also have some information on both the grazing and the graze out on our Ag Manager website as well. So those were just some opportunities to extend the grazing season, maybe to try to minimize some of those feed costs. Another area of those top 10 ways to kind of reduce or minimize feed costs was minimize feed waste. And so we've got this slide here. There's two sources of waste lost. It can be either from storage or due to feeding. So storage, whether you store outside on the ground versus maybe storing it if you have access to storing it inside and ship. And so there's been a lot of research done at the various institutions, various universities, and they found anywhere from about 5 to 40% hay can be lost due to storage issues. Feeding, a source of loss there could be either due to the bales or how you feed the hay. And obviously, this particular method, if you take a round bale and you put it out in a pasture, it tends to have the highest loss. I believe Colorado State University had a study that found about there's up to 50% loss by kind of the method that you're seeing right here on the screen. Another way that would reduce that is you put a ring around it, right? A ring bale. And there are other various methods as well. If you take into account these two ways in which hay is lost, looking at the current price of hay, I think we average at about 65. I think we use $65. It can range anywhere from $12 to almost $60 per cow over the winter. And so if you go back maybe 5 slides, 6 slides, we had that one pie chart, right, that had the difference between your top end producers and the bottom third. The feed was $133 per head. So that's almost half right there by minimizing feed waste. And so these little things, although maybe they seem minor, they definitely can add up in a hurry.